In this problem, I'm going to solve how many grams of H2O will be produced from 4.3 moles of H2SO4. In the previous video, this is the same chemical reaction. The difference is, in this one, I'm giving you 4.3 moles of H2SO4, and I'm asking for grams of H2O. Before, it gave you some number of grams and asked for moles of something different. So I'm going to list out my givens. My given is 4.3 moles of H2O4. My want is some number of grams of H2O. As you learned previously, and we touched again last video, these numbers out in front, my coefficients, tell me how many moles there are in relationship to each other. So for H2SO4, there's 1 mole, because there's an invisible 1 there, and there are 2 moles of H2O. So I'm going to write that down as one of my relationships. As with all of these mole ratio relationships, it can be flipped. So right now I'm going to put 1 mole of H2SO4. The reason I use those two coefficients, the 1 and the 2, is because that's what I am given and what I'm wanting. So that's how I need to relate those two to each other. Remember, the 1 and the 2 are coming from those coefficients. And I can flip it. So there's our relationships that we have. Depending on how we set this up will depend on which one of these we use. We only ever use one of them. We don't use both. Not in the same problem anyways. Now, if I'm given 4.3 moles, then I immediately can use one of these relationships this time. Before I was given grams, so I couldn't immediately use one of these. But because I want grams, I'm going to need a molar mass relationship. But it's going to be of this substance, H2O. So I'm going to go ahead and figure that one out. So here's my molar mass, and it's for H2O. Now hydrogen, I have 2 of them. Each one weighs 1.01. And oxygen, I have 1. Each one weighs 16. So my total molar mass is 18.02 grams per mole of H2O. Okay, so now I have my 2 relationships, and these are the 2 relationships that you're going to be using. It just depends on which substance it is that you have the grams or want the grams. It's going to change which one you're solving for the molar mass. Now let's start our dimensional analysis. You're always going to start with your given up here in red. So I'm going to start with 4.3 moles of H2SO4. Nothing goes here. Now, if I have moles of H2SO4, then I need to have moles of H2SO4 on bottom because it has to match that diagonal like we've been talking. This doesn't have moles of H2SO4. Yes, it has moles of H2O, but not H2SO4, so I can't use that one. I need to start with one of these this time. Because I need moles of H2SO4 on bottom, that's going to roll off this one. So that's not the one I need. This time it's the second one, because I need the H2SO4 on bottom. So I'm going to take the 1 and the 2, and I'm just going to plug them in. So I've plugged in my relationship, 1 mole of H2SO4, what I had on bottom, to 2 moles of H2O I've plugged on top. Now I'm not where I want to be yet because my want in blue up there is grams. So I have to extend this one more step. If I have mole of H2O on top, mole of H2O needs to go on bottom. Not the 2, just the unit, okay? And I want grams. And this right here is how many grams are in 1 mole. So I'm going to plug in the 1 mole on bottom. I'm going to switch to blue because I'm finally in the unit that I want of 18.02 grams of H2O. Just like in the last video, to solve this, you take your 4.3, you multiply by 2, you multiply by 18.02, you divide by 1, you divide by 1. Yes, it's dividing by 1, so technically you don't actually have to plug that into the calculator. And once you plug all that in the calculator, you get that your answer is 154.97. And the last units you wrote down were grams of H2O, so that's the unit of your answer.